My name is Steffen Lehmann. I'm a professor of sustainable architecture and the director of the Space Laboratory, which is based in Sydney and Berlin. The title of my presentation is Transforming the City Towards Low Carbon Resilience. It is structured in 4 parts, and we'll talk about compact mixed-use walkable cities, low-carbon cities, and the future of our urban systems, and why we should transform them, especially the existing city. Very early in my career, it became clear to me that it's all about high-performance buildings and low running energy consumption at less than 50 kilowatt hours per square meters. All my buildings are very energy efficient. And we also publish, me and my team, we publish every year a book. For instance, the last one was the Low Carbon Cities book. Also very obvious is that we can only change the city and transform urban systems if we are in integration of system and technologies as well as collaboration. Innovation does not happen within silos. We have to collaborate and open up those silos. We're also building the theory into practice, and we have been working on award-winning urban design projects in cities like Mildura, Taree, and Newcastle. These are intermediate and smaller cities in Australia. For instance, in Mildura, we are building a water garden, and it's all about how the city meets the river. Water is really interesting. This is the old way, but today we use water quite differently with biofiltration swales, so cleaning it in natural ways and using the city as a water catchment. In fact, the compact mixed-use walkable city is nothing new. We do not have to reinvent the city. It's been around with us for a long time. Traditional urbanism is ecological urbanism. The city has always been compact, mixed-use and walkable for thousands of years. Some time ago, in 2008, I developed the theory of Green Urbanism, which is a holistic framework that differentiates all our activities and areas of intervention in 15 segments. But it really, because it's holistic and systematic, you cannot separate and isolate one of those 15 out. You have to work on all 15 at the same time. The main problem really is the questionable resilience or lack of resilience of our suburbs and urban sprawl, especially in the US and Australian and Canadian cities. It is the age of the city, many people have said, but it is not yet the age of the sustainable city, and we're gonna have to introduce the age of the sustainable city. Today, all cities are committed to CO2 reduction targets, and some of them are world champions like Oslo, Copenhagen, and Stockholm, and Munich, which have in average around 2.5–3 tons CO2 emission per capita per year, which is world class. Asian cities in average have around 5 tons, and most of the European cities, the other European cities have this too, and the Chinese cities have already increased now around 6 tons. But the culprits are, of course, the American, Australian cities, which have 3 times in average the amount of CO2 emissions. So the main problem is the lack of housing diversity in the suburb, the lack of opportunities, the low density, and its increasing consumption. These are all air-conditioned and car-dependent solutions to live, where 85% of the trips are by car. So it's very important to contain the footprint of the city, to make sure the city doesn't sprawl and expand endlessly. Introducing a gross boundary makes sense, and Portland City, one of the most livable cities in the US, has had a gross boundary since 1972, which made it more walkable and with a focus on public transport and compact mixed-use neighborhoods. Clearly, we need better urbanization models. The old, outdated models don't work anymore. There are new paradigms. One of the issues that is holding us back is that when we have a discussion about sustainable cities, it seems like a lot of people have different definitions. There is not one clear definition yet of what does it mean to have a low-carbon, sustainable precinct or city. There are many different definitions, so we're gonna have to work on the theory, gonna have to work on the practice at the same time, and of course bring theory and practice together. Those kind of models, like in this image, are clearly outdated. You can only arrive by car, there's not one tree on this car park, the building has no openable windows, it's somewhere out in the business park, far away from the city, totally car dependent. We cannot afford to do this further anymore. These are outdated, typical models. There is now, everywhere in the world, a renewed focus on the civic public space. For instance, on this image in Spain, we see what used to be a congested car parking street has been turned into a green, pedestrian-friendly light railway using side street. And this has been a fantastic improvement. And we see those kind of developments all over the world, where we have mixed-use urban blocks of 4 to 8 stories where we have living, cross-ventilated, working and retail and very high quality public space for cycling, walking and public transport. This is the way forward how we should build a city. We do a lot of research on the history and evolution of cities, and clearly what we saw around 90 years ago with the emergence of the automobile that had an impact and changed the way we built and developed cities, and the functional city leading to suburbs, shopping malls and all those things that were based on the car-dependent city. Now, 90 years later, we are at an equal significant break where we actually, after decompacting, we have to recompact the city again. After 80 years decompacting, we are now in the business of building the compact city again in the 21st century. We don't quite know yet what those eco-cities, green cities will look like, but they will look different, and we are just about to develop not only the theory, but also what those cities look like, and we're going to build the first eco-cities probably in China in the next years. In fact, there are many ways where we can cut greenhouse gas emissions, and the opportunities are plentiful in cities, from energy, wastewater, material flow, mobility, food supply, housing, and so on. So again, we do not have to reinvent the city. We have the knowledge already, we had it for a long time, and the city has to be, again, compact, mixed use, walkable, with integrated mobility. For instance, in this slide we see how wasteful, what a waste of public space the city has if we occupy it by the car, by the automobile, instead of coming by bike, by bus, or making the city walkable. Interestingly, we had car ownership peaking in Europe, in the US and in Australia around 5 years ago. So clearly it's not good enough to design a car that needs less fuel. We still create traffic jams. So we have to reduce the car dependency by doing away with the need to drive and to move people closer to where they work. For instance, we don't have those long commutes in the morning and in the evening back and forth from home between workplace and home. One solution that has been very successful in many cities, for instance Zurich in Switzerland, is car sharing. It's all about collaborative consumption, and we see a lot of young people that don't want to own a car anymore when they choose membership in a car club rather than ownership. Melbourne in Australia has done a lot of interesting improvements of public space, green spaces, the edge of the river, along the waterfront, but then they realized that 80% of the public space is actually the streetscape. And as many of us always say, great streets make great cities. It's really about improving the streets first and making it more pleasant to walk, and every year take away car parking places slowly, maybe 1 or 2% every year, reducing the car parking in the city center. So by that, it becomes gradually, slowly, more and more difficult to get with the car into the city center, because we don't want people to have to go to the city center with the car. Therefore, we of course need first-class public transport. We need urban infrastructure, and we need to identify the right strategies for each climate, each geography. What works in Brisbane will not work in Melbourne, and what works in Jakarta might not work in London. So we have to be clear how we can really make places for living and working more productive, more energy efficient, more enjoyable. And there are many, many technical solutions available that we can select and apply. For instance, facades. Interestingly, 60% of the building's performance is already decided by the facade system and technology that we very early at the stage of a project decide. We can integrate those green building technologies in the facades. We can turn buildings and whole districts and neighborhoods into energy surplus neighborhoods and districts, where we turn consumers into eco-citizens. That's the way forward, not consumption, but generating more energy than you need and feeding it back into the grid. So it's all about smart technology, retrofitting, and turning those cities into low-carbon precincts and smart cities with the threat of growing consumption. With a rising middle class, for instance, in the Asia-Pacific region, we will have 3.2 billion people entering the middle class by 2030, and with more affluence comes increasing demand, expectations, and higher consumption. We also see the aging population, the demographic change, this shift having a huge impact on cities. So the question is, what kind of public space do we need? What kind of infrastructure, what kind of housing do we need? What kind of mobility do we need when we have more and more people in the age of 60 and above? It is about the eco-city that is in a healthy balance, where the hinterland and the urban core is in an agreed, negotiated balance and not one growing at the expense of the other. Most of the time, the city has grown at the expense of the hinterland, of the countryside. So containing the urban footprint means we also protect precious agriculture, landscape and forestry. Dongtan in China was a great eco-city vision, never got built. Dubai is probably not such a useful model for us, so Abu Dhabi, Masdar is not getting built as promised, it looks more like this. So the vision of the eco-city that has been invented and drawn and visualized so many times is now about to get realized. In the moment, frequently in China, the harsh reality looks different. The public space hasn't been finished in some of those cities yet, and the living conditions are in cramped, dark flats without windows even, and without any air movement, are not acceptable. We're gonna have to have better urbanization models. The air pollution, of course, is an immediate threat in China. We're gonna have to cut down on the pollution and on the greenhouse gas emissions. And there are plenty of international best practice models that we can learn from and share the experiences of turning existing cities and districts in the post-industrial city into low-carbon green precincts, where we see that low-carbon precincts turn the city into a power station, generating its own energy as a decentralized system, or as a water supply catchment, or as a source of food supply, even empowering community, where we see that we turn public land into productive use, producing energy, cleaning water, producing food, making cycling pleasant with cycling highways in London, or the change of mode of transport like here in Stuttgart, where the light railway takes away and takes with it the bikes so people can get out and cycle the last 2 kilometers to their home, but also offering incentives for electric vehicles, where we see the tax-free revolution happening in places like Norway, Oslo, for instance, offering free car parking spaces and charging stations, a new type of infrastructure in the city that comes along with electric vehicles, where we have new types of public spaces emerging that are also supporting the low carbon transition. So how can our research at the university help solving some of those urban challenges? I just really want to run through a couple of research projects at the end of my presentation where we involve PhD students and master students because they have to learn how to apply the latest technologies to real solutions. And one of those projects is about urban microclimate, keeping cities cool. The other one is about the energy, transport, waste and water demand forecasting tool for planning low carbon precincts before they get built, better data for evidence-based decision making, but also the low-impact construction system we have developed with prefabricated engineered timber. As cities get hotter, the urban microclimate heats up, where we see the phenomenon of the urban heat island, where the inner city part is significantly warmer, up to 5-6 degrees Celsius, than the city at the edge or the suburb. And we have the increase with global warming of heat waves, which of course are a killer, where we have the mortality rate going up significantly. So we've done the largest study, comparative study between Sydney, Adelaide and Melbourne, where we changed the building code to legislate against black roofs that are always 5-6 degrees warmer in the roof space, energy that has to be cooled down again, and mitigation opportunities using vegetation, water, built form and materials that do not store the heat. The other research project where we involve students is about building timber high-rise prefabricated buildings as urban infill to densify the city in a more intelligent, smart way, where we use engineered timber systems as a regrowing resource, storing carbon, where we can turn buildings into carbon sinks. These are prefabricated, off-site manufactured buildings in workshops in a controlled environment, leading to safe, clean, quiet, orderly construction sites where the construction only needs half the time. However, it is of course important that the timber comes from a sustainably harvested, certified timber source and is not cutting down rainforests. And there's always the argument, which I believe is true, that the 19th century was the architecture of steel and glass with Paxton's Crystal Palace and Chicago high-rise, and the 20th century was the material that was used most was off-form concrete in all its shapes and forms, concrete. And the 21st century will be the century of engineered timber using modular prefabrication, storing carbon in the material, turning buildings and districts into carbon sinks. So what has become more important overall to complete and conclude is, I believe, system thinking. Those links and synergies between various systems being natural and man-made has become extremely important. Another one is the increasing important role of public space, the civic space, and the low impact mobility that comes with it. And a shift in scale from looking at individual single buildings to entire urban design of neighborhoods and low carbon precincts. But also, while urbanization will not stop and not slow down, it will keep on accelerating, we need better models of participation processes to involve the people, the citizens, in decision making. Very important. And the paradigm shift that today we know technology alone will not be enough. Technology alone will not fix it. It needs to be embedded into a societal framework to be effective. And last but not least, urban governance, new forms of partnerships, cooperation, and sharing that we see emerging that will keep changing the city towards resilience and low carbon. Thank you.